soon, I think. Mostly on my way over here, it was, here's your vocabulary word for the day. It was graupel, G-A-R-A-U-P-E-L, which is hail that is smaller than the size of a pea, commonly found in the European Alps. There you go. So, yeah, today we are going to talk about GIFs. And I think, based on kind of previous experiences with this talk, we might not run the full time today, probably the only time. We will not run the full time. But if you want to use that time to answer questions or something like that, I'm absolutely open to that. So let's see. Go back a little bit. So today I'm kind of mostly just going to spend some time talking to you about how GIFs function currently in our culture. So let's do that. By the way, if you're clicking on Google links from the Canvas page, sometimes when it's a Google link, you actually have to click on the link on the top. It doesn't automatically come into this window. So if anybody in particular that might have emailed me is having trouble accessing the Google documents, just make sure that you click the link and they should come right up. If you do that and you still can't access the Google documents, definitely send me an email. There might be something wrong. So yeah, today we're going to talk about GIFs, and I think that we're talking specifically about GIFs, but in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been something has kind of happened that's a little bit interesting, and that is that GIF and short loopable video have become kind of glommed together vis-a-vis this app that you may have heard called TikTok. And so definitely, some people might ask, oh, what's the difference between a TikTok and a GIF? The difference really is just technological. That GIF is a different file format, and that short loopable video, is something that you would use in actually a video editor. So we'll be looking at video actually right after this. So that should give you a little bit more context for when you might want to actually use video versus when you might want to use a GIF. But I'll probably mention that a couple of times today. So today's questions, those are the study questions for today. I'll be touching on all of these during our talk today, so I'm not going to read them out loud. So one of the things that I think is kind of remarkable about the GIF as a file format is that it has been out there longer and used longer than almost any other image format out there. So probably there are probably only 1 or 2 other image formats that are as old. And that's usually not a claim to fame for a digital thing, right? That it's 30 or 40 years old. But it is for the GIF, and it's something that's really kind of amazing and remarkable, actually. So the GIF is something that was invented in the late 80s, and people use it today, and it has changed actually almost really not at all. It hasn't changed at all since then. So I think that a lot of people, when they use GIFs, especially artistically, they're actually trying to kind of call up nostalgia for a lo-fi era, or nostalgia for an 8-bit era, or an era where stuff looked kind of crappy and maybe not as good. So the GIF format was invented specifically as an internet image exchange format. And so there are only 3 image formats that fall under that category of image formats that were specifically designed for internet communication. GIF is one, JPEG is the other, and PNG is the more contemporary one. And so the idea behind a GIF was that at the time that GIFs were invented, video was incredibly difficult to compress and to send over networks because it was just so gigantic. So the GIF was created as this compressible, very sort of small format that you could send over a oh God, a telephone line. Um, and, it was something that actually functioned in that way. So you probably have heard outside of this class, references to culture wars in our own culture. Like, I think the culture wars are just raging just as much as they can. But there is also a sort of like internet culture war about how to pronounce GIF. I pronounce it GIF. You can pronounce it however you like. So arguments, I'll give you some arguments on both sides. Some people call the pronunciation of GIF that it just makes sense because a hard G is what the acronym stands for. So the acronym is Graphics Interchange Format, so graphics GIF, right? But then apparently at some point, and this has happened multiple times over the last like 10 years, the creator of the image format GIF, which is this German guy, basically said, it's actually GIF. And everybody was like, oh my God, it's like one thing I've been doing wrong my whole life and I never realized it. And so I guess like I would consider GIF to be like the common sense pronunciation and still probably the most common pronunciation. I think that this kind of like meme just says it all, right? Like, oh, you're pronouncing it the right way? That must be very, very satisfying for you. But if you want to pronounce it the right way, go for it. If you don't want to pronounce it the right way, basically we don't care. And I think it's like one of those kind of things that internet culture especially, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in internet culture, like the smaller the argument, the bigger it can get, right? This is like a great example of that phenomenon. So the idea of using GIFs in the 1980s like seems really obvious because they were created specifically for that time period. They're specifically for like low bandwidth internet applications. So why are we still using GIFs 30 years, 40 years in the future? And there's a couple of reasons. One, GIF supports ridiculous amounts of data compression. So you can make something really small. That's especially useful if you're sending things to people on mobile networks because, we might have awesome 5G here in Madison, but if you're texting your family in like rural Arizona, they might only have LTE or they might only have 1G. So, it's having that kind of flexibility is really awesome. And then, of course, there's also like the element of humor. That a short, sort of humorous animation is just incredibly happy-making. Like, wish I could like GIF all my texts. I would if I could. Take too much time. So we're going to talk about a few like different categories of GIFs, and we're going to talk about some of these categories are really boring, and some of them are like really interesting and have kind of a lot going on. So we'll look at all of these different categories. So the reaction GIF is definitely something that is sort of ubiquitous in our culture. I mean, I think probably every single one of us has used a reaction GIF at some point. One of my favorites is this crying baby right here. This is like every damn day, I'm just like, ugh. It really like captures my inner spirit, But there have been a lot of criticism of reaction GIFs in terms of the fact that there has been this kind of preponderance of people of color being represented in reaction GIFs and people who are not of color, white people, basically using those reaction GIFs. And so if you're interested in sort of like thinking about identity and thinking about race and social justice, these are a couple of essays that might be really interesting to you. And it kind of talks about why so many reaction GIFs are actually people of color, like disproportionately. And they've done some scientific studies on, reaction GIFs on major GIF websites and things like that. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I think we can kind of look at and just maybe think about and be reflective of, in our own life and our own selections. Crying babies. Hi. Okay, so then there's also GIF as political satire, and that's definitely like something that's very much alive and well, also vis-a-vis TikTok. And one of the reasons why GIFs and kind of TikToks basically lend themselves well to political satire is because we're sort of working and living in an age where we can literally like rewind every stupid thing that somebody says, right? So, so every little reaction, every little gesture, every little nuance of somebody's delivery can be sort of captured, isolated, infinitely repeated, and then it basically becomes them and what they're about, which is kind of like maybe not super great, but yeah, it's definitely like the idea of thinking about politics as like a sort of superficial soundbite culture, this idea of using short like reaction animations and things like that really fits in really well to that kind of like superficial engagement. And of course, this sort of knocking down politicians maybe a peg, too, I think is something that we see a lot in GIFs. So if somebody stumbles down the stairs, you can bet, or up the stairs, as the case may be, you can bet that that is going to be, GIFified like hundreds of times and distributed all over the place. So another category, which I just put this in here for sort of to be comprehensive, is the replay GIF. And I think that replay GIFs mostly, I'm not a sports person, but if I were, I would probably use these GIFs to like maybe celebrate like a really great play and like relive that moment, That's what you do when you do sports, right? Like, yeah. Okay, just checking. Yeah, so, but it is sort of like a major, if you go to any GIF site, you're gonna see a billion of these. And so now we're getting into kind of the art adjacent GIFs. And these cinemagraphs are really sometimes described as moving still images. Cinemagraphs, if you Google for cinemagraphs, you're going to find beautiful, kind of hauntingly quiet, subtly animated scenes. So they look like they call them a cinematograph because the quality of the production is very similar to a film or a filmic production quality. So yeah, like mostly cinemagraphs are like static images and they just have like aspects of them that are animated. So for example, I have this amazing GIF that, I probably can't show you because I didn't look it up, but I have this amazing GIF of long-haired cats in a pool of water, like with unicorns, and the long-haired cats, like their hair just like shimmers, like over and over again, and they just sit there like, I'm a cat. So yeah, that's definitely like an example of a cinemagraph. Here's some more cinemagraphs, and this is also like, when I think about art GIFs, I mean, I think cinemagraphs are really just a subset of art GIFs, but they're definitely the kind of thing where you could potentially like walk into a gallery and see a screen hung with just this short looping animation. And then for all of you scientist people out there, I just want to point out that the GIF format is also heavily used for scientific visualization. And if you happen to be a chemist, any chemists here? Okay, JACS, the Journal of American Chemistry, basically they have in their journal publication standards now that you can add GIFs into your papers, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so scientists use GIFs all the time for, short sort of like, to basically visualize, what data does over time rather than just a static image data visualization. So one of my personal favorite types of GIFs is the infinite loop GIF. We're going to look at a bunch of these, and usually they're based around kind of this zooming thing that happens, but it's basically this sort of like never-ending loop. So here's some never-ending loops. This is also like super indicative of kind of like the way that memes sort of propagate. So there was actually a static meme called double face palm a long time ago, and then somebody made it into a GIF, and then somebody took this famous artist and put her in the same sort of situation. And so it's just maybe like a pretty good illustration of how things kind of like build on top of one another. These are some kind of like more advanced infinite loops. Definitely fun. And then, of course, I have a whole page devoted to cat infinite loops. I think for a long time this was my favorite GIF ever. But yes, so many cat GIFs. And then this guy also has been amply GIFified, as I'm sure you can guess. This guy right here. So I think that some of those GIFs that we just looked at are definitely within the sort of like boundaries or category of art GIF. And there's definitely like a weird sort of sweet spot for GIFs in this sort of art world. They can be curated online, which is something that happens, every once in a while somebody will make a GIF exhibition, which is basically just a website that has a bunch of GIFs on it. Artists also present GIFs like in person, right? So they would be like on a projection screen, or they would be maybe on a TV monitor, kind of playing by themselves on that TV monitor. And so I guess the question is, are GIFs accepted by the art world? And I guess I would argue that it depends on which art world you're talking about. Are they accepted by the digital art world? Like, absolutely they are. Are they accepted by like maybe the world of like traditional painting and sculpture? That's like kind of a stretch. But certainly, I think GIFs are out there, and they're out there in an art context. The other thing about art GIFs that you might want to think about is the fact that there is this, potential relationship between GIFs and video. And so I have seen people who actually start with GIFs and then make a longer video of like many short GIFs together. Just another way of kind of getting it out there and getting the information out there. So Faith Holland, hopefully, I think she'll be coming to campus next year, actually. She's probably like one of my very favorite artists, working with the GIF format as kind of one of her primary formats. She did this whole series called Visual Orgasms, where she was really interested in kind of like having things that are just like bombarding you, And a lot of her work deals with like collections of things. And one of the things that her work is about kind of conceptually is that she deals with a lot of technology nostalgia. And a lot of her work is about the relationship of her own body to technology. So like some of the work that she does outside of making these GIFs would be like she makes these like gigantic sculptures made of cord, like Ethernet cord. or she does these sort of performances that really sort of like, they're kind of edgy. And a lot of her work is sort of about tech nostalgia, but it's also about like, what is the future of technology? And she tries to kind of imagine those futures in a sort of positive way. I think that like it's really common in tech art and in tech talk to kind of assume that we're all headed towards some like AI apocalypse, where we're all just going to become like plugged into the matrix, and then humanity will slowly become extinguished. Yeah, you're like, yeah, pretty much. So I think one of the nice things about Faith Holland's work is that she kind of doesn't use that trope. She actually imagines like, where would computers go to die if they wanted to be happy? And she comes up with, of course, like they're going to go where there's like flowers and woodland creatures and, these really interesting kind of ways of conceptualizing that. So Lorna Mills is another sort of New York-based artist that's doing a lot of stuff based on GIFs and collections. And so here, she's actually using samples from old movies. And she had this whole series of GIFs that was really based on action movies and common kind of tropes in action movies. So in almost every action movie, there's like a scene where the car kind of like spins its wheels and drives away, right? And so she just collected a bunch of those. And I mean, there's like a word for that, by the way. It's called a supercut. If you're basically taking a bunch of films and like pulling out similar moments. But she basically does that in GIFs. And that's pretty entertaining. So, I mean, there's this sort of style of GIF making that we talked about previously where you're taking like video or photos or pre-existing digital media and sort of getting it in here. But, I mean, the other thing you can do with GIF is that you can make an animation from scratch, if you can find Scratch anywhere around. And pretty much, I mean, with any two-dimensional image-making tool like Photoshop or Illustrator, you can make a GIF that is animated based on a drawing or based on shapes. And so this Yoshi Sudoka is sort of like, definitely like, kind of on the more abstract end. Some of their work is really abstract, and some of their work is sort of this like almost like pop psychedelic kind of feel. And then another artist who really works like primarily with GIFs is Carlaganis. She's another New York-based artist, and a lot of her work deals with female identity and how it is to experience the world as a female-bodied person. So she's sort of playing around with like classic tropes of female empowerment here vis-a-vis the superwoman, and kind of combining a lot of different styles. And then of course here, sort of like playing with the myth of Atlas. And in this one, it looks like there's a sort of like, maybe a comment on beauty culture. So one of the ways that GIFs can be kind of made that is pretty compelling is to use sort of a hybrid approach. So in this image, David Kabelski is using a three-dimensional rendering that's probably made in a program like Rhino or Maya. And then there is this sort of rotating image sequence in the back. So this is a really great example of like combining two different technologies into one sort of product. Also, this particular person is actually, by day, a professional animator. So he makes a lot of these like weird animations of swarms. And I think that what he's doing is actually using these GIFs as tools to kind of pre-visualize some of the, special effects driven like film type stuff that he might do for his job. Many artists do have day jobs. And then I have just like, for something different, I mean, I think this is like a beautiful sort of rendering of type in a GIF. I think when we think about internet culture, like it's really super easy to kind of like go back to everybody's favorite font, Impact. That's like the meme font, right? I think we've all seen it like 500,000 times. But there are lots of other ways that you can deal with text in an animated format. And so one of the reasons I wanted to show you this is just because it's such a creative way of dealing with text. And then lastly, lest we not fully engage in pop culture, this never gets old. It never, ever gets old. Never gets old. Do I have to say it out loud? Putin on the Ritz. So good. Yeah, so definitely we can sort of like think about, you know, how GIFs are used in our everyday sort of life and how they might be used in kind of a more elevated setting, like if we wanted to make something like a work of art out of a GIF. And they're two separate things, but they don't necessarily have to be completely different. There was an artist really early in the early part of the century. If anybody's taking Rosenberg's class, you'll probably hear about this person, Marcel Duchamp. And Marcel Duchamp basically took an object from like out on the street. It was a urinal, and he brought it into the gallery, and he said, "This is my art." And everybody was like, what? But, you know, we're basically living in an age where in the art world, you can take something from one context, like internet culture, bring it into an art context, and if you can talk about why you're doing it and why it's there and why it's important, you're an artist. Like, that's all it takes. So I'm happy to kind of like answer some questions if anybody has any questions about like pretty much anything. Anything? Okay, I got one last thing I'll show you. This is a little bit of a side thing. Let's see. I've been working on my environment. That is not the right one. Excuse me. Yeah, so hang on just a second. Not sure exactly. Okay, that's so interesting because this is nowhere near normal playback speed, but I'm just going to go with it for now. That looks better. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to just tell you about this project, I'll probably in April, I'm going to host like an open session in the humanities building. So if you wanted to come out and play test it with me, I'm just looking for people to basically like fail and say like, no, I can't jump over that hill, I'm too short, or whatever. That's the kind of feedback that I need. So I'll be kind of just reminding you about that in April. And if you're interested in helping me out with that, I'll have like snacks and refreshments and stuff. But yeah, I just want to like get people's input. So that's pretty much what I have for today. It's a little bit of a shortened session. I'm sure everyone probably wants to like go play in the snow or hide with a cup of coffee. Either way, have a wonderful day. I'll see you on Monday, everyone. Thanks for coming out.